I'm Clint Alderman. I'm a potter from Northeast Georgia, Habersham County, and I started making pottery in 1996. I use a wood-fired kiln and make my glazes with wood ashes, and I use a local dug clay source. I was born in North Florida in the Panhandle, and we traveled around the country with my dad. He was a commercial contractor, and he found a job in the Northeast Georgia area, in and we moved up here and found a little house. And after we moved there, shortly after, I was always interested in pottery and different types of art. I found a bank of just red Georgia clay and started playing with that, and that's sort of how I got started initially. The folk pottery tradition was a little bit of both. It combined that artistic element along with history, the story of the Metters family and all of that. There were several, but the main ones were Edwin Metters and his cousin CJ and Michael Crocker. They were that they helped me in different ways. Edwin, I would go over and I helped him in his shop with working his clay up, or helping him pour his glaze over into different containers, because he just couldn't lift the big heavy buckets and that kind of thing. And that was more like one-on-one, working in the shop with him. And then CJ, I remember helping him fire his kiln and watching him, and he came over and instructed me a couple times when I was building my first kiln. And then Michael Crocker helped me a lot on the historical end, learning about the different potters that had come before the Metters family, and different glazes and formulas, and he's real knowledgeable on all of that. And the various techniques for turning like larger ware, the piecing and that sort of thing, he was doing more of that than Edwin. Edwin never did do any bigger stuff, much over about a gallon to my knowledge. And it was neat being able to watch Michael do the bigger pieces, and Melvin, watching him make snake jugs and that sort of thing. My dad was a part-time antiques dealer, and he would sometimes go to an estate sale or an auction, and he'd find an old jug or an old churn. And being interested in history, I just loved it, and I wanted to learn all I could about it. And we found out about a pottery show that the Metters family was having. I think it was in '96 at Mossy Creek, and he took some stuff and I took some of my stuff that I had just started at the time. I took some of my stuff there, and it sort of got me immersed into that element of it more. At the time, there was more of a folk element rather than the studio aspect of it. There seems to be a lot more studio now than there is folk. I'd say I like to do anything that's like based like you would have seen in a country type setting, like farm animals, or the snakes or the lizards that I do, that kind of thing. Or also coming more from like my own personal interests, historical scenes from history. I enjoy collecting antique books, so I'm always looking at these cool engravings in the books, and I'm like, I want to draw that, I want to paint that, I want to put that on a piece of pottery. I don't ever do like 3/4 of it, but sometimes I come up with something pretty good that I can make work on a piece of pottery. But things like that. I taken inspiration from all kinds of folk potters, new and old. Um, uh, Sometimes there's a contemporary potter that, he'll just come up with something really cool, and I'll see that, and I'm like, it'd be cool to put my own spin on that design. And then I'll just be I might be browsing a book or something, or an auction catalog, and they're selling a piece from 1840 or something, and I'm like, that would be a cool form to put a snake on, or to put a face on, or something like that. What's interesting about it in northeast Georgia, and the Catawba Valley region, is the old Edgefield, South Carolina tradition of where the alkaline glaze was first developed. It's been passed down person to person all the way back to then, and to me that makes it really unique. Because it's the continuation of that handed-on tradition, person to person, all the way back. If it hadn't been for Cheever and Lanier Metters, it would have died out, and uh, it enabled potters like myself and some of the others to keep that knowledge going. The how to make the ash glaze from scratch, or how to go out to a floodplain and find some clay. How to build the traditional style tunnel kiln or groundhog kiln, that sort of thing. And it gives it a uniqueness that you don't find anywhere else in the country. That tradition had died out in the north by the turn of the century, but here in the south it continued on, and it still goes today. I start with a local dug clay source. It comes from near the Mossy Creek campground, and I'll dig that first, and I'll process it in my pug mill. The pug mill is pretty much just a mixer with blades in it, and it stirs it up, and it's got a section that de-airs it, that it pushes it through, and it comes out in a tube. And you'll slice that off, and I usually do probably around 15 30-pound bags of it per firing, and I'll spend a day or two mixing clay, and I'll let it age for a little while. It turns a little better when it's aged a few days, and after it's done that, it's ready for turning. So I'll put it on the wheel and turn whatever form I want to make. If it's a face jug, I'll make the jug first, let it stiffen for a while, and then add the face. And then once I get usually 20 to 30 pieces made, that's enough for a firing, I'll let it dry for a couple of weeks, and then it's ready for glazing. If it's something more intricate, I'll bisque fire it ahead of time, like a snake jug or a really elaborate 8 or 10 gallon piece, because it's really risky just raw firing and raw glazing that. I don't know how many of them I've broken trying to do that, but it'll be ready for firing, and then you glaze it. The glaze looks like pretty much a tub of thick chocolate milk, and you dip it down in that, and you got to wipe the glaze off the bottom to keep the sand from sticking to it. There's several little processes you have to go to do that. It takes about a day to glaze, and then another day to load the kiln. And once it's all loaded into the kiln, I light a little preheat fire to kind of just dry everything out if there's any moisture inside the kiln overnight. And then I'll start the firing the next morning about 8 o'clock and gradually raise the temperature up over 8 to 10 hour period. And eventually the flame will start to shoot out the chimney, and it'll get to about 2,400 degrees, and it'll stay at that high heat for a couple of hours. And then once it reaches the right temperature, I'll you pretty much just shut it off and let it cool down on its own, and wait usually 36 to 48 hours to remove it from the kiln, and then it's pretty much ready to sell. You have to do a little bit of grinding if the glaze ran off and some of the sand stuck to the bottom, but then it's ready to go. It's probably the work processes of preparing the clay and hauling the kiln wood, firing the kiln, glazing, and all of that are an additional, depending on what all you run into with it, 70 to 100 hours of extra time added to it, each firing. The wood-fired kiln, you're able to make it in to use what's called a reduction atmosphere in it. It's where it puts carbon into the clay body, and that carbon added to the clay body, I don't know all the details of the chemistry of it, but the addition of the carbon atoms that go into the clay can create a different color. Electric kilns are fired with just oxygen present, and with the especially with the alkaline glaze, your alkaline glazes in an oxidized atmosphere, and an electric kiln will come out more of an orange or a solid brown color, and in a wood-fired kiln they'll get more of a greenish tint, and that's the addition of the carbon from the reduction atmosphere. And also you can get a higher a better vitrification. It'll be more durable. It'll be waterproof. It won't seep. It won't. It's something a person can use if they still wanted to use it. Most of the people I sell to, they buy it as art, but if someone did want to use it, they could. And that higher firing temperature, to me, it helps you to get a product that is a little harder for other people to produce, and that way you can kind of be a little more unique and be a little more distinctive with it, and kind of have your own technique there. And then just the all that knowledge, studying about the history of it too. You hate to see that knowledge just get lost. The phrase, every time an elder dies, a library dies with them, always comes to mind. But you just think of, when a potter like Edwin Metters, or when Lanier passed, all the knowledge they had that, that we weren't able to gain from that. And I just always thought it'd be neat to, try to at least learn some of what they knew and try to keep that going too. It took a good many years. What I would do is I would start out, in my mind, at one level, and I would think I had mastered it, but then I'd learn something else about it and see it in a different perspective, and I would be like, maybe I didn't know as much as I thought, and then I'd improve a little. And I felt like after 12, 15 years that I had really gotten to a point where I could refine a form, rather than just make a form, if that makes sense. I could really give the form some good symmetry, where I don't know, maybe make maybe sort of, I'm thinking sort of like an ovoid jug versus a straight-sided jug with a just a straight rim. I could add a little bit more of a fancier rim to it, or take out some of the turning ridges out of the side rather than leaving them. Yeah, I've done a lot of experimenting. I think like 95% of them have failed, but I've done a lot of experimenting, and it's, when you do some of that, you do hit on something pretty good that works. Some things I've learned were like, I can take blue glass and put on the pieces and get some blue color to it. That's been in the past 7 or 8 years. I can add some cobalt oxide to a lighter burning clay and give it create a blue swirl with that. There's also some different type of oxides that you can experiment with. Copper. If you get the conditions just right in the kiln, I did it once but couldn't recreate it. You can get a red with copper oxide and different things like that. But I try to keep my primary base on just ash glazes. There's two variations of wood ash glaze I use. There's one with a higher proportion of ash in it that creates a drippier, runnier, more of a tobacco spit or a watermelon type finish. And then there's the other one that's more of just a plain clear glaze. That clear glaze, I can do some color highlights with some white clay slips or some iron slips and that sort of thing, or cobalt slips. It's just a love for it. I don't know. It's kind of a love-hate relationship. Sometimes you don't like it. You don't want to get up and haul wood when it's 40 degrees, you know, or climb in the kiln. It's like an igloo when you do that. But then there's something about it when you get that piece of pottery out of the kiln. It just makes you feel so good inside. You feel like you've conquered it all, you know, and you feel like, you know, I've created something, and you know, it's completely mine, and it's something that you know, someone else can't recreate, and it just gives you a really good. It's almost like a feeling you get when you're doing some kind of like an endurance race or you know, kind of thing like that, I guess. And at first it was tough, but now I kind of at times I kind of crave the work a little bit, if that's not too strange. But you just you want to get out and work, or you want to get out and do something with it, just because you feel like you're not doing anything, just sitting around. It's definitely different. There's a lot more studio influence in it. The to my knowledge, the it started transitioning from the churns and the jugs and that sort of thing by about 1950 in this area. I think it had already died out in other regions, but in this area by the 50s. And you were getting more art elements, more collegiate influences. And by the 70s, people were buying it, the face jugs and that sort of thing, more as art. And by the 90s, there were more people that were learning it in college and collegiate places rather than learning it from their dad or their granddad and that kind of thing all the way back. And that first-hand knowledge versus the collegiate setting kind of sets it apart, where you know, you learned it from a guy in school versus you're a family member or someone who mentored you that just had learned it on back. You kind of get a different form or a different version of it. Like, it's hard to say it you know, there's going to be, I think, different areas of collecting that people pursue, and different areas of creating it that they pursue. And it's probably going to be just how well the product can be marketed, what the person is creating. But as far as folk pottery goes, it's going to be whether I can come up with something that, you know, the person wants to collect, either as investment or a decorative item, or whether it's something that they're just gonna see and they're gonna be like, oh wow, you know, that's the most amazing thing, or whether they're seeing something else from more of the studio realm that they prefer over that. So it's going to just be whether, I think it's going to come down to the personal taste of the collector more so. Probably just to try to retain that older style, with it in a world that needs it more for art rather than function. The older style being the syrup jugs and the churns and the pitchers, and just the functional farm pottery that they made, and to try to incorporate those forms into what I produce and not go completely over into just sculpting and that sort of thing. There's a pretty good demand for sculptural forms now and that sort of thing, and I do some of that, but I try to keep that, keep a 50-50 balance and incorporate the other in with it.